And today's challenge is a suspension refresh on my 2011 X204 GLK 350 4MATIC. I'm going to be doing struts in the front, shocks in the back, so it's getting the whole package. It's got about 180,000 miles on it, and quite honestly, it still rides really well. I'm just starting to feel the first effects of the struts and shocks starting to get a little bit loose, a little bit rattly. I have two choices. I can just live with it until it gets bad and then replace them, or I can do them now and live with the advantage of essentially new shocks and struts for the remainder of the time I own this car. It could be another 100,000 miles, and might as well have all those 100,000 miles riding and driving like a new car. So I'm a firm believer in getting good shocks. I'm replacing these with Bilstein front and rear, which are OEM quality and pretty much the go-to. Here are the strut mounts that I've got for it, Febby Bilstein. So when I'm done, she should ride like a new one, especially since I've already replaced the front lower and upper control arms and sway bar links. So let's get started on it. And the next step is to remove the sway bar links. Now, you'll notice I lifted both wheels. That makes it easier to remove the sway bar link, because if you lift only one, you're going to have to lift. You have to put a jack under the hub to lift it back up to ride height to take the tension off the sway bar, which after all wants to keep the front wheels at the same height. That's its whole job. So lifting both wheels means there shouldn't be any real tension on this sway bar once you disconnect it. Now you're gonna, I believe the standard internal Torx fitting for this this internal bolt here is a T40. This is an aftermarket sway bar. It may be different. Basically, I'm going to just remove the 18mm nut with my impact. It'll probably just take it right off without any real issues. If not, what you need to do is just get a wrench on it, put your Torx wrench into the center, and turn it off, holding the center still with the Torx tool while you're removing the nut. So let's just go ahead and see if the impact will, like most things, make it easy. Not exactly. It does, you can see it is spinning it, so I will have to use a tool to hold the center from turning. So let's get on that and figure out which one this one takes. Okay, that's all well and good in theory, but for some reason, this aftermarket link does not have a Torx fitting in the, I don't know whether it was just a mistake in fabrication or if something is, I don't know what's going on, but there is no way to hold this one steady the traditional way. You won't have this issue, but what I'm going to do, just to show you one of your kludge fixes that you can do, I'm going to hold the shaft by jamming a flat screwdriver up against it, and then go ahead and reapply my torque. Okay, crude, but effective. Okay, and once that's loose, should be able to just pop it out. You see there's virtually no torque at all on that. Okay, so let's get that out of the way, and we can now start on removing the brake caliper. Alright, the next step is to remove the E18 brake caliper mounting bolts. They may be tight, folks. Okay, another detail is I have recently replaced this front CV boot, and the grease you see isn't from a leak per se, but it's just a little bit of overfilling getting out around the end of the boot here. No big deal, but I'll clean it up so I don't have to live with it during the rest of this repair. And as it turns out, the sway bar links in this car are apparently shot. That's really bad. I wonder, I don't believe this is the original. Definitely due for replacement. It actually still feels fairly tight. I hadn't noticed any noise or anything. So these are on the replace list without a doubt. I can go ahead and reuse them for now. They'll work just fine. But I'll get these replaced in short order. Okay, now that the bolts are off, I'm going to give a little bit of a pry on the caliper itself. Normally this doesn't take much. These are just very, very new brake pads. So they're at full height, and the rotors have been on there long enough to develop a pretty good lip. So that the pads have to be compressed to the point they will clear that lip. Normally it's just a matter of giving a little bit of a twist with your hands to get it loose, but in this case I needed a little more pressure. So all right, we got the caliper out, and now we're ready to start working on the strut in earnest. Okay, and next we need to disconnect the wheel speed sensor wiring from this plastic harness here, pry out the brake line from the little C-shaped clip that holds it in, and then what we'll need to do is actually remove this this piece of plastic on the front, because that probably will not be on the replacement if it's like most replacements. So you can use a trim removal tool. I'm just going to use a pair of needle nose pliers here to try to pull this center connector out. Okay. Remove the two bolts that hold the actual knuckle to the strut. You've got an E18 on this side and a 21 millimeter just regular nut on the other side. So just get in there and remove both of those. And before I remove the second bolt, I'm going to bungee the knuckle itself using the brake caliper mounting studs. I'm just going to tie it off to the sway bar in this case, just to keep it from dangling too much, because if it dangles, it's putting the full weight on the outer CV joint here, which is just not a good thing. So you really don't want to do that. It can droop, but you just don't want a lot of weight on it, so that should take care of that. I'll go ahead and remove the second bolt now. So the strut is loose on the bottom, at least, and we're ready to start working up top. And this is obviously not drooping enough to matter, so we are good to go, folks. Okay, the upper bolts are a little easier to get to. You can see there are 3 of them. So they're E12 and should be a little bit less torque, so they should come out easy. And to remove the third one, you probably want to hold on to the strut down below just to keep it from falling whenever you get the third bolt out altogether. And now that you've got the new and the old parts out, this is where you set them side by side just to make sure that everything looks like it's a match, that it's going to fit, that it's the same configuration, because I can't tell you how many times that might not be the case because they sent you the wrong part, or it's just designed wrong, or you ordered the wrong part. So at any rate, This all looks good. One thing you do want to notice whenever you take apart an old strut like this is the configuration. Now you'll notice the strut mount, the three bolt holes are different. You can see obviously there's one that's centered, and that corresponds like this. So that one, this is that center hole here, so it's like this. And keep in mind this hole here is in line with this notch, which is in line with the strut mount bolt. So basically when you put it back together, you're going to replicate that arrangement altogether. So speaking of which, spring compressors. Now here's a little philosophy, folks. I know it's easier to buy a loaded strut, which comes with a new spring, a new mount. So all you do at this point, when you get this out, is bolt the new one in, call it a day. The reason I don't like to do that is because of a couple of reasons. Number one, I'm cheap. This is a less expensive way to go. Number two, it's really hard to get a OEM quality strut or shock, or strut in this case, that's as good as the original in a loaded strut configuration. You can get some decent aftermarket parts, but it's not going to be, in this case, Bilstein quality. Now, it could be they actually make a loaded strut. I didn't see one, but that's beside the point. And number three, and really the most important to me, is it's very, very likely if you put a loaded strut in that the spring characteristics are going to be just different enough that the ride height and the stance of your car, which I've worked very hard to get perfect, is going to change. I did this to an Audi one time. I threw a set of loaded struts in it, raised the front about an inch, which I got to tell you was not a good thing. And that's because whenever they're making a loaded strut like this, they tend to make it for pretty much every vehicle in the range, and it could be a V6, a four-cylinder, a V8, sport suspension, all kinds of options, front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive. So the spring rate and total lift might be different. So by reusing the spring, you're saving money, you're ensuring your car is going to sit and ride exactly like it did, at least from a spring perspective. And that's why I do it, folks. So let's get to it. What I want to do next is I'm going to compress the spring using these relatively inexpensive spring compressors so that we can get this thing taken apart and get the spring out of it. Okay, next step is to take that off, but is to remove this nut. Now you do not want to remove it without compressing the spring. This is a loaded gun, folks, and if you took this off, just forced it off, when you got to the end of the threads, this mount would become a projectile and things would end very badly. So what we got to do next is to compress this spring, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, I'm using the very typical old school spring compressors that just about everybody has. Now every one of these is going to present its unique challenges. In this case, the issue is that the distance from the center of the spring to this rod tends to be less than the spring perch is going to allow. So you can see I got interference here, and I'm not really seated on that. Now I might be able to force it, but you can see it's putting everything into just a bad situation. Very often what you have to do is find a place where you can compress, run the compressor down, tighten one side, which is going to turn this. This is designed to pivot, so that's okay, and it's getting replaced anyway. And then turn it over and get a bigger bite on the other side, using your newfound compression of the spring on the other side to help you get there. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by compressing these springs. Basically, I'm going to squeeze these two coils together here in order to give me just a little more play on the other side and hopefully make it easier to get. Now I can figure out if it's going to be easier to turn it from one direction or the other. In this case, it looks like probably this is going to be the way to do it. Okay, I'm going to put the little locks down to grab the springs a little more completely. And I'm going to start turning this down. This particular one uses a 24 millimeter or probably 15/16 wrench to turn it. So I'm just going to go get one of those and get to work. Okay, you can see that now it's moved the angle of everything enough that now my socket is actually jammed up against the short side of the spring perch. But I think it's going to give me enough bite here to get on the other side. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get all the coils in one bite or if I'm going to have to do it in two. But let me place the other side and see what I can do. All right, I've got the placement where I'm actually across almost the entire spring, which is going to let me compress it quite a bit. You might notice this one's not fully seated, but as I torque it down, I'm sure it's going to seat. And it should do it immediately. I wouldn't continue to tighten it if it didn't. But yeah, you can see it's actually squirming onto the coil, and it will clear itself of the upper coil here in just a second. Okay, and now it's just a matter of tightening it all down there. It cleared, and we are well and truly compressing the spring now. And as you're doing this, do try to make sure that these locks are in position. That's supposed to keep it from losing the coil. I don't think that's a remote possibility at this point, but you really want to be as safe as you can when you're working with a spring compressor, because these things can really be dangerous. Okay, that's a lot of work, but basically, you know, you're there whenever you see the bellows separating, or signs that the spring itself is no longer being held firmly in place on both ends. And at that point, you're actually ready to remove this nut. So let's get to that. Okay, now the spring is compressed, we can remove this nut. Now, the ideal way to do it would be to use a special ratchet like this one, which gives you the ability to do a open center kind of operation. You can see I can actually insert the proper Torx, which in this case T45 Torx bit, into the shaft to keep it from turning. Now, if you don't have cool tools like this, one of the hacks you can do is the old school 13/16, also 21 millimeter spark plug socket. If it's got room for the, okay, this is the wrong one. Here's the right one. This is a T45 wrench, and I can put that on the center. And now I can hold that in place. Kind of a kludge, but I can hold it with an adjustable wrench, and then can turn the spark plug socket with a regular 19 or 20 millimeter socket. So here we go, folks. Okay, broke it loose. Now just a matter of taking it the rest of the way off. And when I put it on, I'll show you how to use the other tool, just so you can be lazy if you want to. But in the meantime, this will work absolutely fine. The nut is off. We can pull the mount off. Along with the mount comes the bellows, so you can squirm it out of the way. And also, what's holding it up is this, which is the bump stop that goes inside. So again, real easy to take apart. And at this point, you got the spring off, and you're ready to install the old spring and the other hardware on the new strut. But let's go ahead and clean this up while we're at it, because it's just too dirty, and you don't really want to add any possibility of squeaks or groans because of dirt and grime in between the metal and the spring. So let's do that. Alright, we are going to assemble this pretty much the way it came apart. First thing you can see is that this spring perch bed here, the rubber piece, goes in like so. There's a little tab here that locates the slot, so it's pretty obvious how it goes. And then you need to make sure you know which end of your spring is up, or you'll put it in upside down. Alright, place the rubber spacer on the bottom with the spring. Make sure you use the right end of the spring up against the stop. And then we're going to go ahead and place the rest of it. I've already pre-placed the bump stop. Now we just have to slide on the rest of the assembly here. Let's see, we'll put the bellows with the rubber spacer and everything, and the all-important mount up on top here. And again, try to align it so that this is in the front. You're going to have to do a little machinations to get the spring onto the perch properly. You may have to release a little bit of tension. Let's see what I can do here. Okay, I'm going to start the nut up on top, which, because I've gone from a Sachs shock or strut to a Bilstein, has gone from a 21 to a 22, and the center shaft itself now, rather than using a T45, uses a 7mm Allen wrench to hold it in place. So I just want to get this on enough to keep it from coming loose. Okay, the trick here is put the fancy open-ended ratchet on there, hold the center with a T45 socket, and crank it down. Now, ostensibly, you're supposed to use a torque wrench on this. I don't have anything in the world that's going to work on this, so it's supposed to be good and tight. That's what I would recommend, is just a good, solid effort to tighten it down, and it should be good. So at this point, we got the cap mounted. It's more or less aligned, and again, it's easy enough to rotate it slowly after the fact. But now what we got to do is start loosening the adjusters, the compressor, to bring the spring back up and seat it. And you're going to want to do that kind of carefully on both sides. This one particularly on the bottom here is a little tight, so you may end up having to just use a wrench to get that one. So take your time, make sure everything seats correctly. Again, okay, important thing, the bottom spring is up against the little stop. It's seated in the little rubber mount on the bottom. The top one, the top spring is laying flush all the way around that rubber mount. The whole assembly is reasonably close to square. It will straighten up, of course, whenever we get it in the car. And then finally, I just need to make sure that the top cap is lined up properly with that central bolt hole being lined up with the mounting bolt. So we're good to go. We've got it torqued down and we're ready to go ahead and put it in the car. And my particular spring compressor interfered with the spring perch a little bit. You can see it took a few bites. What I'd recommend, especially if you're in a salty northern climate, is to just give it a little spritz with black paint. Anything will do. And let's take a look at the bottom, see if we got any gars there. Not really, but I'll give it a little shot anyway. Alright, we are good to go. Good to install this thing back in the car and get it lined up. And the final portion of the pre-placement assembly phase is to put this plastic cap back on top, which is acting a little bit tight, but it's on there. It's mainly cosmetic, so notice it also lines up perfectly with this hole. If that doesn't happen when you place it in the two mounting slots, you know you've done something wrong. And again, it's all lined up and ready to go back in. All right, now we're ready to place the strut, the loaded strut as it were, back into place. Slide the upper part up into its final resting place and bring the strut mount around where it's resting in the right general area. Be careful, you do not want to cut your CV boot, but just leave it resting loosely, and you should be able to go up top and get the upper bolts started. I'll show you that next. All right, for this step, it really wouldn't be a bad idea to have a helper, but at the very least, get your upper mount bolts ready to go and reach around under the car. Probably grab the spring and you'll be able to maneuver the strut into place where you can spot the holes and get the bolts started loosely so that it will support itself and you no longer have to strain a gut to hold the thing in place. Okay, those are snug. Now we can go down below before we tighten those down and get the bottom bolts in. All right, now if all goes well, this should all line up pretty easily. You'll have to move around things a little bit. You may have to raise the hub just a little bit to get it to line up. And another trick is you can use a screwdriver or similar tool to get the holes lined up perfectly. But basically you're just looking to move things around to be able to get the bolts inserted through the knuckle, and really not a difficult job. Put on the nuts loosely, and I'll show you why. All right, and to facilitate that, I'm going to remove the bungee that was holding the knuckle in place because it's no longer necessary. Right, so now everything's in place loosely and it's time to go get the Loctite. And next, run down the bolts to snug. All right, now it's time to torque it down using a torque wrench, of course. Here's the things, folks. I find very different information depending on where you look on what the proper torque is. The best information I could find suggests that if you've got the dynamic handling package, which is the code 483, you should probably look it up and find out if you have it if you don't know. You need to torque these to 59 foot-pounds. If you don't have it, you're supposed to torque them to 74. I'm not sure which is right. So I think what I'm probably going to do is just go ahead and crank them down to the 74 foot-pounds. I've also gotten information that suggests another 90 degrees beyond that. Sounds excessive. I don't know which is correct. I suggest you look it up. Don't take my word for it. That's what my lawyer says anyway. So let's go ahead and torque this down to 74 foot-pounds and see how it feels. So I'm going to start by turning the nut so I don't have to swing the torque wrench quite as far, because I'm almost, okay, there's my 74. And now if I wanted to take it a little bit further, I could add a 90 degrees to that. It probably wouldn't be excessive. I'm just going to give it a compromise, give it a little bit more on both. So again, I'll do the same for the bottom bolt. Okay, next I'm going to go ahead and place the caliper back on the knuckle, which means I can move my toolbox out of the way and wiggle it into place, line up the holes, put the bolts in. Once you get the first one in, the second one's a lot easier, of course. Okay, gonna run those down tight. And then I'm going to torque them to 81 foot-pounds. Okay, and just to be nostalgic, I'm going to use an old school beam style torque wrench to tighten the top bolts to the required 24 foot-pounds. In this case, instead of listening for the nice little click, what you're doing is you're watching your vernier indicator here, your linear indicator, deflect until it gets to 24 foot-pounds. And then you do the same for the other bolts. Okay, because I bought a quality part, the sway bar link lined up perfectly. I just drove the nut down on it. You'll probably end up using the Torx wrench and a regular wrench to tighten it down. I just ran it down because it'll be replaced anyway. All that remains down here is to go ahead and put on the little plastic insert here that holds the brake line and the wheel speed sensor in place. Put the clips in, push in the locking tab. At that point, you need to put the brake line in first, and it goes in the C-shaped clip on the back. Alright, so that's in place. Clip in the wheel speed sensor cable into the provided clips, which here, and if you can see that, but this one goes here, and this is going to be a little bit snug, but that's okay because this whole assembly moves together. This is where you need the slack, so it looks like all the slack's in the wrong place. It isn't. Okay, we are buttoned up here, folks. All that remains is bolting the wheel on, doing the other side, dropping the car down and torquing the lug bolts. And what's really astonishing about this whole process is that these actually were riding fairly good. I thought I was fairly impressed at how well they had held up. Folks, it's not supposed to work that way. You're not supposed to be able to move it up and down that easily. This is definitely, I mean, it's not, they're not totally shot, but you can definitely feel they're worn beyond normal normal boundaries, so I'm expecting a big improvement on the ride quality.